blood sacrifices, secret weddings, and a festival where men ran through the streets, striking women with goat hides. Valentine's Day wasn't always about chocolates and love letters. In fact, its origins are far stranger and darker than you might expect. Before heart-shaped candies and candlelit dinners, the Romans celebrated Lupercalia, a wild fertility ritual filled with animal sacrifices and bizarre traditions meant to ensure good fortune in love and childbirth. And what about Saint Valentine? The truth is, no one knows for certain who he was, or if he even existed at all. What we do know is that centuries of legend, poetry, and marketing have turned his name into a global symbol of romance. Welcome to Armchair Archaeology, where we uncover the hidden histories behind ancient traditions. Today, we're diving into the mysterious past of Valentine's Day. And stay with us until the end. We'll reveal a surprising fact about how the earliest known Valentine's message wasn't actually written by Saint Valentine at all. Let's unravel the real story behind this holiday. First, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We explore the hidden histories of ancient civilizations, lost technologies, and forgotten traditions, so you won't want to miss what's coming next. Before we get into Saint Valentine, let's start with the Roman festival that some believe inspired Valentine's Day. It wasn't about love, it was about survival, purification, and primal rituals that seem almost unthinkable today. Every February 15th, the Romans celebrated Lupercalia, a chaotic festival meant to ward off evil spirits and ensure fertility. The event began at the Lupercal cave, where, according to legend, the twin founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, were nursed by a she-wolf. To honor this mythical origin, priests called Luperci performed ritual sacrifices, slaughtering goats and dogs as offerings. But the real spectacle came next. The young men chosen as Luperci smeared the animal's blood on their foreheads before wiping it away with wool soaked in milk, a symbolic act of purification. Then, wearing little more than strips of goat hide, they ran through the streets of Rome, striking women with pieces of the sacrificed animal's skin. Far from being horrified, women welcomed the lashes, believing the ritual would increase fertility and ease childbirth. For a society that prided itself on order and civilization, Lupercalia was a moment when Romans embraced something raw and untamed. But did this festival actually evolve into Valentine's Day? The connection isn't as clear-cut as some believe. However, one thing is certain. As Christianity spread, the church had a habit of reshaping pagan traditions. By the 5th century, Lupercalia was officially banned, but its influence didn't disappear. It may have helped shape something new. This idea isn't just modern speculation. Over time, Christian leaders often rebranded pagan traditions rather than erasing them completely. But was that really the case with Valentine's Day? Lupercalia wasn't just a bizarre fertility festival. It was deeply tied to Rome's founding myths and ancient superstitions. But was it all just symbolism? Or was there something older, lurking beneath these traditions? The festival's name comes from Lupercus, a Roman deity associated with fertility and protection, often linked to Faunus, the god of the wild. More importantly, it was tied to the legendary she-wolf, Luper, who, according to myth, nursed Romulus and Remus. The Luperci priests performed their rites at the Lupercal cave, believed to be the very site where the twins were raised. Archaeologists have even discovered a cave beneath the Palatine Hill that some claim is the Lupercal itself. Though its true purpose remains debated, the possibility that Romans were performing rituals there for centuries adds an eerie weight to the legend. But Lupercalia wasn't just about myth, it reflected real fears and desires. Romans saw February as a time of purification, which is where we get the word February from februar, the Latin term for cleansing. The ritual of blood smearing and the ceremonial whippings weren't just for spectacle. They were believed to drive away evil spirits, ensuring prosperity for the coming year. Similar fertility rites existed across ancient cultures, showing that these beliefs weren't unique to Rome. Yet, despite its deep roots, Lupercalia survived long past Rome's pagan era. It wasn't until the late 5th century that Pope Gelasius V finally banned the festival, calling it unchristian. But did the Church replace it with Valentine's Day? The connection isn't as clear as some think. Regardless of whether Lupercalia directly influenced the holiday, by the time it faded, another legend was already taking shape, the story of Saint Valentine. But was he a real person, or just another myth? If Lupercalia explains the festival side of Valentine's Day, then where does Saint Valentine fit in? Surprisingly, history doesn't give us just one Valentine. There were actually multiple figures by that name, and their real stories are buried in legend. The most famous version tells of a 3rd century Roman priest who secretly performed marriages for young couples. But he wasn't the only Valentine. There were at least 2 others. One, a bishop from central Italy, and another, a completely unrelated martyr. Their stories blurred together over centuries, making it nearly impossible to separate fact from legend. At the time, Emperor Claudius II had supposedly banned marriage for soldiers, believing that single men made better warriors. Valentine defied the law, conducting forbidden weddings until he was caught, imprisoned, and sentenced to death. It's a compelling tale, but here's where things get murky. No Roman law banning soldiers from marrying has ever been found, and no contemporary sources mention this Valentine. History mentions multiple Valentines, and their stories overlap so much that even historians aren't sure who's who. Their legends were eventually merged, making it nearly impossible to separate fact from fiction. By the way, what do you think? Do you believe Saint Valentine was a real person, or just a legend? Let me know in the comments. And then there's another Valentine, one who had nothing to do with love. Valentine of Terni, a bishop executed around the same time, was also venerated as a saint. Over the centuries, these stories overlapped, leaving historians wondering whether any of them were linked to romance at all. With so many competing versions, how did Saint Valentine become the patron of lovers? The answer may lie in a letter supposedly written on the eve of his execution. But did it ever really exist? One of the most enduring parts of Saint Valentine's legend is the idea that he wrote the very first Valentine's message. The story goes that while imprisoned and awaiting execution, Valentine befriended, or perhaps even fell in love with, his jailer's daughter. On the eve of his death, he left her a final note, signed with the now famous words, "From your Valentine." It's a touching tale, but there's one problem. No ancient records mention this letter. The earliest versions of Saint Valentine's story don't include any reference to romance. In fact, the detail about the love letter only appears in much later retellings, especially during the medieval period, when Valentine's story was reshaped to fit the growing idea of courtly love. Why did this happen? One reason is that medieval scribes often embellished saints' lives to make them more inspiring or more dramatic. The idea of a doomed lover writing a farewell message fits perfectly into this tradition. And since early Christian martyrs were sometimes associated with acts of compassion, the story of a kind-hearted Valentine leaving a note may have evolved naturally over time. But here's the real twist. The earliest known written Valentine doesn't come from a saint at all. In 1415, Charles, Duke of Orleans, wrote a romantic poem to his wife while imprisoned in the Tower of London. His letter begins, "Je suis déjà d'amour tanné, ma très douce Valentine," which roughly translates to, "I am already sick with love, my very gentle Valentine." This is the first recorded use of Valentine as a term of affection, written over 1,000 years after Saint Valentine supposedly lived. So if the first real Valentine's message wasn't from a saint, where did the idea of Valentine's Day as a celebration of love truly begin? To find the answer, we have to turn to medieval poets. If neither Saint Valentine nor his supposed letter started the romantic tradition, then how did February 14th become the Day of Love? Surprisingly, the real turning point wasn't a saint's sacrifice or an ancient festival, it was poetry. The first clear connection between Valentine's Day and romance comes from the 14th century, when Geoffrey Chaucer, the famous English poet, wrote about lovebirds choosing their mates in February. In his poem Parliament of Fowls, he describes a gathering of birds on Saint Valentine's Day where they each find a partner for the coming year. This is one of the earliest known references to Valentine's Day as a time for love. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Chaucer may have completely invented this connection. There's no evidence before his writing that February 14th had anything to do with romance. In fact, in medieval England, February was not an ideal time for birds to be mating. Some historians believe Chaucer was referring to a different Saint Valentine's feast day, possibly one celebrated in May, but over time, the February 14th date stuck. After Chaucer, the idea spread quickly. Poets like John Gower and later writers in the courtly love tradition built upon this theme. By the 15th century, nobles were sending each other Valentine's letters, a tradition that would grow into the modern holiday. It's a reminder that holidays are shaped as much by storytelling as by history. And if you're fascinated by how history evolves over time, you'll love Secrets of the Ancient World. It dives into lost cities, engineering marvels, and ancient mysteries. Grab your copy in the pinned comment. But how did a poetic tradition turn into a full-blown celebration with gifts, cards, and chocolates? The answer lies in the centuries that followed. By the late Middle Ages, the idea of Valentine's Day as a celebration of love had taken root, but not because of history or religion. It was literature that truly transformed the day. Geoffrey Chaucer may have been the first to link February 14th with romance, but he wasn't the only one. In 1415, Charles, Duke of Orleans, wrote what is now considered the earliest surviving Valentine's message to his wife while imprisoned in the Tower of London. His poem begins, Je suis déjà d'amour tanné, ma très douce Valentine, which roughly translates to, I am already sick with love, my very gentle Valentine. This marks one of the first recorded instances of the word Valentine being used as a romantic term. From here, the tradition spread through noble courts. In 1477, an English woman named Marjorie Brews sent a letter to her fiancé John Paston, calling him her right well-beloved Valentine. Unlike the legend of Saint Valentine's farewell note, these letters actually exist, offering real historical proof that by the 15th century, people were using Valentine's Day to express love. The poetic and literary associations only grew stronger over time. In Shakespeare's Hamlet, Ophelia laments, "Tomorrow is Saint Valentine's Day, all in the morning betime, and I a maid at your window to be your Valentine." By this point, the idea of a Valentine as a lover was widely understood. But while medieval poets helped shape the romantic Valentine's Day, the traditions we recognize today, cards, gifts, and flowers, wouldn't fully develop until centuries later. So how did Valentine's Day become a massive commercial event? The answer lies in the rise of mass-produced romance. So if medieval poets turned Valentine's Day into a celebration of romance, how did it become the billion-dollar industry we know today? Well, that's where things get even more interesting. But how did poetry turn into profit? By the 18th century, Valentine's Day had firmly established itself as a celebration of love. But it was still mostly an affair of the nobility. Handwritten love notes were exchanged among the upper classes, often filled with elegant poetry. But as literacy rates improved and printing technology advanced, Valentine's Day started to reach a much wider audience. The first major shift came in the early 19th century with the rise of mass-produced Valentine's cards. These early printed cards, especially popular in England and the United States, featured sentimental verses, intricate lace patterns, and romantic imagery. They were perfect for those who wanted to express their feelings without composing their own words. By the mid-1800s, the holiday had become so commercialized that some critics were already complaining about overused cliches and factory-made emotions. If you're enjoying this deep dive into history and want to support the channel, consider hitting that super thanks button. It helps us keep making quality content about history's greatest mysteries. One of the biggest turning points came in the 1840s, when Esther Howland, a Massachusetts entrepreneur, became one of the first to mass-produce Valentine's Day cards in America. Her elaborate, lace-trimmed designs became wildly successful, helping to shape the holiday into the gift-giving tradition we recognize today. But cards weren't the only thing that changed. In the late 19th century, chocolate manufacturers saw an opportunity. Richard Cadbury, of the famous Cadbury Chocolate Company, helped pioneer the idea of selling chocolates in decorative, heart-shaped boxes. This clever marketing move not only boosted sales, but also cemented the association between chocolate and romance. By the early 20th century, florists capitalized on the demand for red roses, inspired by their symbolic connection to love in classical mythology. Meanwhile, jewelers began marketing diamonds as the ultimate romantic gift. What started as medieval poetry had transformed into a billion-dollar industry. But how far has this commercialization gone? And what can archaeology tell us about the real Saint Valentine? Let's dig deeper. With so much legend surrounding Saint Valentine, is there any physical evidence that he existed? The answer is complicated, but several places claim to hold his relics, though none can be verified with certainty. One of the most famous sites is the Church of Santa Maria in Cosmedin, Rome, where a flower-adorned skull, said to belong to Saint Valentine, is on display. The skull bears a faint inscription identifying it as Valentinus, but historians remain skeptical. Since multiple Valentines were martyred in the 3rd century, there's no way to confirm if this was the Valentine associated with the holiday. Other relics linked to Saint Valentine can be found across Europe. Dublin's Whitefriars Street Church holds a casket said to contain his bones, gifted to Ireland by Pope Gregory XVI in 1836. Meanwhile, France, England, and even the Czech Republic all claim to have fragments of his remains. With so many competing relics, it's clear that Valentine's legacy became more symbolic than historical. But perhaps the most intriguing archaeological connection comes from catacombs beneath Rome. In the late 1500s, human remains, labeled Valentinus, were discovered in an ancient burial site. While there's no way to confirm they belong to the Saint Valentine, it shows how early Christian martyrs were venerated long before the holiday took on its romantic associations. Ultimately, archaeology has yet to uncover definitive proof of Saint Valentine's life or his connection to love. But what it does reveal is how history, legend, and faith blend together, turning a largely unknown figure into a global symbol of romance. But if the real Valentine remains a mystery, what about the claim that Valentine's Day directly replaced Lupercalia? That theory is more complicated than it seems. Let's break it down. One of the most popular theories about Valentine's Day is that it directly replaced Lupercalia, the wild Roman fertility festival. The idea makes sense on the surface. Both took place in mid-February, and early Christian leaders were known for repurposing pagan traditions. But is there actual evidence for this connection? Surprisingly, not really. While Pope Gelasius I did officially ban Lupercalia in the late 5th century, there's no record of him replacing it with Saint Valentine's feast day. In fact, the first historical mention of February 14th as a holiday didn't appear until hundreds of years later, and even then, it had nothing to do with romance. The feast was originally a religious observance, honoring a martyr, not celebrating love. The real shift happened in the Middle Ages, when poets like Chaucer introduced the idea of Valentine's Day as a time for lovers. This means that the romantic connection to the holiday likely developed independently of Lupercalia, rather than as a direct Christian replacement. If anything, the transformation of Valentine's Day was driven more by storytelling and cultural shifts than by the Church rewriting history. Another common myth is that Saint Valentine himself started the tradition of love letters. As we've already uncovered, the earliest known Valentine's message wasn't written by a saint at all, but by Charles, Duke of Orleans, in 1415. It's a perfect example of how history often takes on a life of its own. Small traditions become legends, and legends turn into global celebrations. So, if neither Saint Valentine nor the Church created the romantic holiday, how did it evolve into the massive celebration we see today? The answer lies in something much more powerful than legend: commerce. Today, Valentine's Day is a billion-dollar industry with millions of people buying cards, chocolates, flowers, and jewelry every year. But how did a holiday rooted in uncertain history and medieval poetry turn into the global celebration we know today? The transformation began in the 19th century, when advances in printing made Valentine's cards cheap and widely available. By the early 20th century, the holiday was no longer just about handwritten letters. It had become an opportunity for businesses to sell romance itself. Companies like Cadbury marketed heart-shaped chocolate boxes, while florists promoted red roses as the ultimate symbol of love. By the 1940s, jewelers joined in, and diamond rings became a popular Valentine's gift. But the real explosion came in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. With the rise of advertising and globalization, Valentine's Day became inescapable. Restaurants, travel agencies, and luxury brands all capitalized on the holiday, transforming it from a simple exchange of affection into a high-pressure, high-spending occasion. Even cultures that historically didn't celebrate Valentine's Day have adopted it, thanks to Western influence and aggressive marketing campaigns. Yet, while some see this commercialization as a loss of the holiday's original meaning, others embrace it as a celebration of love in all forms. In recent years, alternative traditions like Galentine's Day, a celebration of friendship, have gained popularity, showing how the holiday continues to evolve. From ancient fertility rites to medieval poetry and modern capitalism, Valentine's Day is proof that traditions never stay the same. They adapt, reshape, and reinvent themselves with each new era. From ancient Roman rituals to medieval poetry and modern commercialization, Valentine's Day has undergone a remarkable transformation. But as we've uncovered, much of what we think we know about its origins is based more on myth than fact. There's no solid evidence that it replaced Lupercalia, no proof that Saint Valentine wrote a love letter, and no historical reason why February 14th became the day of romance, except that medieval poets like Chaucer said it was. And here's that surprising fact we promised. While many believe Saint Valentine wrote the first Valentine's letter, the oldest known written Valentine actually comes from Charles, Duke of Orleans, in 1415. He wrote a romantic poem to his wife while imprisoned in the Tower of London, over 1,000 years after Saint Valentine supposedly lived. Yet despite its mythical origins, Valentine's Day has endured, evolving with each generation. Whether it began as a fertility festival, a religious feast, or a poet's invention, it continues to be a day where people celebrate love in all its forms. So the next time you buy a Valentine's card or a box of chocolates, just remember, you're not just celebrating love. You're taking part in a story that's been rewritten for centuries. And in the end, maybe that's what matters most. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden history of Valentine's Day. If you enjoyed this journey through the past, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Armchair Archaeology for more explorations into ancient history and mythology. What other holidays or traditions would you like us to uncover next? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to uncover even more hidden histories and forgotten civilizations, grab a copy of Secrets of the Ancient World. The link is waiting for you in the pinned comment. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of discovery alive.